It's a difficult question to answer what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure. I just wanted not to face racism, and if that meant fighting racists and being part of a gang, then that's what I was doing. So in my teenage years, I wasn't thinking about careers, I was thinking about being in a gang. There are too many funny stories to mention. One is, I can say that I was beaten up by skinheads one night outside a mosque, and I thought I was going to die. So I shouted out the Islamic declaration of faith. I said, La ilaha illallah, as I was getting boots and bottles hit into my head. And they stopped hitting me. And I thought, wow, that's the power of the Shahada. But in fact, what had happened, and maybe this was the power, is that as soon as I said that, a police car came around and all the skinheads ran off. That's impossible. I'm an open book. I believe that the youth are always a mirror of the previous generations. So what we may feel is different today may not necessarily be the case, but nonetheless, I do feel that the youth today are different, that their challenges are different. But essentially, the youth will always have their own place to mold their own story, and we should assist them in that. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it until you're ready. Ask your heart, and of course, ask your heart when you're ready, and of course, if you're prepared. And when you look for a woman, always look in your mind and tell yourself, is that the mother of my children? Is she going to be with me a partner that will help to bring up the next generation the way that I believe, according to my beliefs, I want them to be? I ended up in Guantanamo as a result of several different things. It was the US-led war on terror that was offering bounties of $5,000 for each person. At the time, 9/11, 2001, I was living with my wife and children in Pakistan, and I was kidnapped literally at gunpoint by American CIA agents and Pakistani intelligence agents and handed over to the US military, where I remained for 3 years in Guantanamo and Bagram. There's a hadith, a saying of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he said, "Ad-dunya sijn al-mu'min wa jannatul kafir," which means that this world in which we live is a prison of the believer and a paradise for the disbeliever. So you can never get used to being in prison, but if we believe ourselves to be in a prison according to our life, that we are limited by certain things, then it's okay. You can get used to it. My faith, the Quran, and other prisoners, and even some of the American guards are the things that helped to keep me strong in Guantanamo. There were guards there who were decent human beings who were shocked at the way we were being treated in Guantanamo, and they didn't want to present themselves as the rest of their comrades torturing us or abusing us. So some of these guards were actually very decent people, and later some of them actually came and visited me in my home and at the cage offices. I think the worst moment I faced in Guantanamo, I'd backtrack. It wasn't really in Guantanamo, it was in Bagram, where I saw somebody beaten to death by American soldiers. That will always be the worst place. The best moment in Guantanamo, probably, for me, there were two. There was one in Bagram, and that was the day I memorized Surah Al-Baqarah. For me, it was the longest surah that I'd known, and it was longest in the Quran, and it took me a year to memorize it. And the other thing for me was the day that I was told that I was going to be released, and the day of my release. Those are two things for me that was the most memorable. The first thing I looked forward to when I was released was getting into a car, winding down the windows and ripping down the motorway, breaking the speed limit. I made several friends as a prisoner, both amongst the guards and amongst the prisoners. There have been so many points in my life when I thought I was going to die. It's hard to list them. I thought I was going to die when I was in Bosnia, when shells were landing around me. I thought I was going to die in Afghanistan when American cruise missiles landed around my house. I thought I was going to die in Syria when barrel bombs were dropped. And I thought I was going to die when I was hit by a car when I was 15 years old. And by Allah's grace, I've been protected. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, I thought I was going to die when the skinheads beat me up. In the early days, the American interrogators told us that we will never be released from Guantanamo until we're very old men, and that the only way for us to come out of there is to testify and give witnesses, even if it's false witnesses, against other prisoners, and to cooperate with them. So in the beginning, that's exactly what they tried to make us feel. I joined Cage in 2006 after I returned from Guantanamo, and I found myself looking at the details of the prisoners that I got to know and the ones that I'd heard about when I was there. So it was the only portal of information that gave those details, and I shortly afterwards started finding myself talking to members of the organization and being a spokesman for it. The work of Cage has been absolutely unique in documenting torture, false imprisonment, detention without trial, and many other laws that have been passed in the UK. Our interns were and continue to be people who will get to experience those things that they would never find anywhere else. And with Cage, that is entirely unique, that you will meet with the survivors of these various laws and practices in the war on terror. It's hard to judge what the future will be for Muslims in Europe or anywhere else. Based on the rise of the far right now throughout Europe and America, we could say that it's bleak. But politics, like anything else, is something that cannot be predetermined. And Muslims should hold fast primarily to their faith, to their beliefs, and never count themselves except as equal citizens in Europe. Muslims should always have hope, even if they're in the darkest of places. That's something I've learned from incarceration, that you should always be hopeful. And that's part of our belief as Muslims, hopeful for the mercy of Allah, hopeful and fully certain that He will deliver on His promise to help those who are in need. It's just a question of time, and it's a question of place. And so a Muslim should never become destitute. Yes, it did change me. It made me a lot more politically astute and aware and active. Had it not been for Guantanamo, I'm certain I wouldn't have been as active, as knowledgeable about the issues of the war on terror. So in a sense, I have to thank the CIA, the FBI, MI5, and all the military intelligence services for interrogating me so much. I think depression is something that I've certainly gone through as an older person, as opposed to somebody who was young and idealistic and traveled and did things. For me, as somebody getting older, depression may come as a result of post-traumatic stress disorder, familial problems, responsibilities, things that you thought might have ended, but that haven't. For younger people, I think the challenge is the stresses of succeeding and what success is supposed to be. And that, for me, it's important that success should be judged with what Allah is pleased with and not material gain. I think one of the most important ayahs for me, and that's had an effect on my life, has been the verse in the Quran when Allah says, من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عهد الله عليه فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. From amongst the believers are those who were true to their covenant with Allah, and amongst them are those who have passed away, and there are those that are still waiting, and they change not one iota. That verse means to me following in the footsteps of those people who were true to their covenant with Allah. Their covenant with Allah was to be straight, it was to be connected to Him, it was to stick within the parameters of Islam, to protect it and its people, and to hope for Allah's victory, and to never go astray one direction or the other. I've seen death in my life from a very early age. From the age of 6, my mother passed away. When I was 11, my sister passed away. When I was 21, my best friend passed away. And since that time, I've been seeing people. I've literally buried people in Bosnia, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and in Britain. And one thing that keeps recurring at every single time, and that's the prophetic dua. When Muslims go and visit the graves, we say, "Wa inna insha'Allah bikum lahiqun," that soon we will also be coming to join you. So one of the things I think often is that visiting the graveyards, whether you know the people there or not, is something we should do, because that is our ultimate destination. And what we did in this life will echo back into the grave as to what our legacy will be.